to be painting a sunset landscape. So we're mainly going to be focusing on lighting today and the way that the light kind of hits the land and the colors are reflected off of it. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to start off going over our brushes. So we have a size 12 bristle brush, a 1-inch flat brush, a size 10 filbert brush, a size 7 pointed round brush, and a size 0 brush, just a little baby brush, a detail brush. The paints that we're going to be using today are going to be Liquitex Basics. So you can get these on Amazon. It's a pretty good paint. We are using a lot of colors today. So we are going to be using white, cerulean blue, cadmium yellow light, cadmium yellow medium, cadmium red light, cadmium red medium, phthalo green, and black. So we've got a lot of colors in our palette today. Feel free to switch them up. And let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so we are painting on 11 by 14 canvas, and we're going to start off with our size 12 bristle brush. Go ahead and dip it in your water and dab it on your paper towel, and we're going to start off mixing together some cerulean blue with a little bit of white, and we're also going to add just a little bit of cadmium red light, and that is going to neutralize it a little bit, so it's not going to be such vibrant blue. It's going to tone it down a little bit. So go ahead and mix those together. And then we're going to go to the top of our canvas and we're going to do horizontal brush strokes going back and forth across the canvas. So notice I am doing longer brush strokes. If you do short brush strokes, you're going to create more texture. So if you want a smoother sky, a smoother sunset, you want your brush strokes to go all the way from one side of the canvas to the other. So now I'm adding a little bit of white to my blue from before, and I'm going to go down below about an inch or so and start filling that in. And so we're creating a gradient. So it goes from darker at the top and it's going to get lighter as it goes down. So now I'm brushing up into the darker blue until it blends together. Now I'm adding just a little bit of black to my cerulean blue, and I'm going to the very top of the canvas because I want it just a little bit extra dark up there. So you definitely want it to blend in. If you feel like at any point there's just a random stripe of color and you want to blend it in, just keep brushing over it until it blends in. But if you continue to keep brushing and brushing and you don't stop, eventually you'll just have one shade of blue, and you don't want that either. You want it to fade from dark at the top to lighter as it goes down. So I added just a bit more blue, have a little bit more pigment, and then I'm just lightly brushing over it just to make sure it's blended. So now if you wipe your brush on the paper towel first, it'll keep your water cleaner longer, and then you just want to press it hard against the bottom of the glass and spin it in a circle to get it all cleaned out. So now I'm taking just white paint and I'm going down below the blue. And now I'm going to start carrying it up into the lighter blue. So you can see those start to blend together. And although we do want the blue to fade even more, that's not really the purpose of this. We're just adding some fresh paint before we go in with the yellow, because we want a hint of green when the yellow and blue mix, but not a ton of green. So I'm cleaning my brush out because I picked up some blue paint. So now I'm taking my cadmium yellow medium and some white, mixing that together. You want to go down below and it's pretty vibrant. It looks bright, but in the end you'll see it all come together. So still doing those very long brush strokes. And you can see we're going right over that white. And we're kind of controlling how green it gets. And you might think, well, that doesn't make sense. Sunsets aren't green. Well, they kind of are in some areas when the colors meet each other. You know, yellow and blue makes green. So in nature, you're going to see those lights reflect off one another, and it will appear green if you really look closely, but it's not super green. So now I'm just cleaning my brush out again. And I'm going to grab just a little bit of cadmium red light, and I'm going to the very bottom edge. And just going back and forth and brushing up into the yellow just a little bit. So a little bit of red goes a long, long way. So if it's too much, you can wipe your brush off on a paper towel and start off in the center, and then you can take it out into the sides. Some of this is going to be covered up by your mountains and your hills, so you're not really going to be able to see all of this. But it's better if it doesn't look like it stops abruptly behind the mountains. So now I'm switching brushes to the Filbert brush, and I'm brushing very lightly over it. So if your handle on your brush is perpendicular to the canvas, you're just going to kind of dig the paint off. So you want your handle to be kind of close to the canvas. So you can see how my brush is kind of laying sideways, and I'm very lightly adding on some cadmium red medium. So you can just carry up the red as far as you'd like. And you don't have to use the Filbert brush. You can really use any brush that you're comfortable with. So now we're going to switch to the 1-inch flat brush. So go ahead and dip that in your water. Brush it back and forth on your paper towel. And we're going to grab some cadmium red medium and a little bit of the black, and we're going to mix those together, adding a little bit more cerulean blue. We're just basically making a nice neutral gray color, but we don't want to use just white and black. So when you add the red and the blue, it kind of gives it more of a purple look. And now I'm using the edge of my brush. It's a little bit dark, so I'm just adding in just a little bit more white. It looks darker over on your palette, and then when you actually go onto your sunset or onto the canvas, you'll notice, whoa, that's a lot. It can look really dark. So I'm using the edge of my brush, but I'm at a little bit of an angle, and I'm just trying to get a nice clean edge. And when you're doing something like mountains or hills, you just really want to kind of wiggle your brush, but it's not like you're wiggling back and forth. It's more like you're trying to make very random movements. So maybe you go up a little bit and then you go down a little bit, just as random as you really can. So I started about 1 inch over from the left side of the canvas, and then I'm kind of dipping down in the center. Obviously, your hills do not need to be just like mine. It really doesn't matter. Even if I'm working from a photo, I'll take creative license and just kind of do whatever I want. And you can absolutely do that as well. I would stick to higher on the sides, higher mountains on the sides, and then lower in the middle where you want the sun to go. So now the next one, I'm just starting over on the right side of the canvas. And if your paint is still wet from your sunset, you just want to work with that because it's going to look even more natural, like it's kind of showing through. And so you want to start layering the ones that are further away, and then you'll start to
add ones that are in front. And so now notice I've got the light gray on most of my flat brush, but I'm dipping just one corner in the darker gray, and I'm putting that corner on the top so that it's creating a kind of dark fade from the top down. And that's what you would often see with like a landscape in mountains far away. So again, dipping one corner in the dark. I'm going to make it even a little bit darker, so I'm adding more cadmium red medium with more of my blue and black mixture. So now I'm doing just a brush stroke that kind of goes right in the middle there, and again having the darker paint at the top. So now I'm taking my palette knife and I'm mixing together some red with some phthalo green, and it is the cadmium red medium, and those, I love mixing red and green together. You can get the most amazing colors. And then I'm adding just a little bit of blue in there as well. So I'm basically trying to get a nice, very neutral greenish purple color. So now I'm just going to load up my 1-inch flat again with the lighter gray color. And I'm adding now a little bit of white to one corner. So I'm trying to make it a little gradient on each little mountain or hill. And now I'm focusing on having lighter on the bottom. So loading it up again and going over the mountain on the right hand side and adding the light to the bottom. So basically for each little hill or mountain, you want it to go from light at its lowest point that you can see to dark at its highest point that you can see, which seems a little counterintuitive, but that's typically how it looks if you photograph mountains with this lighting. So loading up in the lighter gray color and dipping one corner in the dark red, phthalo green, blue mixture. And this is going to be my tallest little mountain peak, and it's going to kind of set the stage for the sun. I am doing it off center, so it's a little bit to the right, but it's definitely going to be the darkest and it's going to be the pointiest. And then still having those rough edges if you want to just wiggle your brush a little bit. Now I'm going in, and this one's pretty dark, so I'm having it get a little bit darker as I go out. And like I was saying before, it's going higher up on the sides and then dipping down lower in the center where the red is and where the sun's going to go. So now I'm switching to the 1/2-inch flat brush, and I'm getting some pretty dark paint there. I'm trying to get those random movements and just carrying it down. So you do want to cover up any canvas as you move down You just want to make sure you're filling it all in. Now I'm just kind of doing short brush strokes. So with the sunset, you want the longer brush strokes. You want it to appear very, very smooth. And then with the mountains or hills, if you're just trying to fill in an area, you want to do short brush strokes because that's going to create more texture. And hills aren't like silky smooth off in the distance. They're rocky, they're undulating, there's a lot of variation in their form. So now I'm just darkening up this main mountain right here. And you can really use either the small flat brush or the large one. It's just whatever you're more comfortable with. So now I'm taking just a little bit of yellow with my 1/2 inch flat, and I'm very lightly brushing over my lighter gray hills. And I'm starting at the center where the sun is going to be and very lightly brushing it over. So this light is being cast on to the mountain by the sun. So it's not like you're trying to paint a yellow hill, you're just trying to paint the light cast on. So you want it to be translucent and very, very light. Light brush strokes. You can wipe your brush on the side before you go in. If you want to make sure it's extra light, you can always go back and grab more. And now I'm using just a little bit of cadmium red light and adding that over the top. I'm not going to cover up all the yellow, I'm just adding a little bit. And now I'm using that same color and I'm coming in down here at the bottom. So I'm picking up some yellow, I'm picking up some of the red light, and I'm doing short brush strokes across the bottom. Now I'm adding some white and some red into my yellow. And we've got a little bit of green coming through as well. And I'm adding kind of some little valleys in this hill. So I'm using the edge of my brush. And if you want it to blend in, your paint still needs to be a little bit wet. Don't forget to mist your paint or your canvas if you paint a little bit more slowly. And I'm just darkening up the top of the hill over here on the right. Now I'm taking just straight red, the cadmium red medium, and I'm now outlining our foreground. So we've got almost this little path that's definitely being illuminated by the red light of the sun. So I'm using the edge of my brush, went to the bottom right corner, went up about 4 inches past where my hill is, and I'm just kind of cutting across. You can go over it a couple times to get it where you want it, but it's definitely not going straight across, it's definitely dipping down. So On the left, you go to the bottom left corner, you want to go up about 2 or 3 inches. So now I'm just going to start filling the bottom of these mountains in. So mixing together more phthalo green, more cadmium red medium. Mix those together with your knife. So it makes a very, very dark color. I'm sure on the screen it even looks black, but it's not quite black. So now we're just going to take the 1/2 inch flat and just fill it in. And again, the short brush strokes are going to make it look more realistic. And I am making it much darker down here at the bottom. But you still want it to blend in. So you can add some more gray or lighter gray to the middle so that it kind of fades as it goes down. So now I'm adding a lot more red. I'm going to have some pretty red hills down here at the bottom. So the cadmium red medium coming up in front of that previous mountain. Now I'm adding just a little bit of yellow, so I've got it on just one corner, and I'm using it to just highlight. So you're adding just a teeny bit of light. You can also add a little bit of that cadmium red light. And you can add a little yellow or red highlight to really any of the mountains that you want to add them to. So now I'm going to switch to the size 12 bristle brush, and I am just grabbing some of that dark mixture that we made from the red, the blue, and the phthalo green. And I am filling in this little pathway that's going to be in the foreground. So we're going to be working from dark to light, so you just want to fill it all in so that we can add the light hitting the grass and the foliage on top of it. Doesn't really matter what kind of brush stroke you do, although I am doing short brush strokes just to add more variation. So if you have any extra paint left over on your brush, you can use that to go ahead and paint your edges now. And you may notice as I'm filling it in that you see some little spots where you're seeing the canvas showing through. Don't even worry about that. It doesn't need to be solid, opaque, black. We kind of want as much variation as possible to make it look more interesting anyways. But if you want to darken it up, you can just add some black paint to it. When you're using the phthalo green and the red, they have a tendency, especially in Liquitex Basics, you can see through it just a little bit. So now I'm just wiping. So you can go ahead and leave that brush in your water and then grab your palette knife and some white and mix that together with some cadmium red light. So I'm trying to get kind of a light orangey color, but I want it to be more opaque so it stands out. And I'll also mix some of that in with cadmium red medium. I'm going to be working with kind of a couple of different shades of red. So now you can go ahead and clean out your size 12 bristle brush and get that back out. Make sure there's not too much water in it. That's super important. And I'm just lightly dipping into some cadmium red medium, and I'm very lightly tapping. So tapping the brush, I'm also grabbing a little bit of black on my brush, a little bit lower than the red, and I'm tapping down to create kind of a little hill. And now I'm grabbing a little bit of that peach color we mixed before. You don't need to clean your brush out in between. I'm adding some kind of little bushes. So now I'm just going to grab some more red and lightly tapping over here on the left side of the canvas, kind of coming up from the bottom left corner. And what you really need to keep in mind with acrylic paints is that it looks really vibrant when it's wet, but as it dries, it does get more dull. So you may think, oh, I have this really bright red here, but it's definitely gonna kind of wash out. So I'm just lightly taking that red and stamping it across. Just kind of getting this first layer in. And you kind of want a little bit all over the place, just leaving small areas with just the black showing through. Those will be your kind of little shadow areas. So if at any point you pick up too much paint on your brush, you can just wipe it off on the side or clean it and kind of start over again. And now I'm going to go in with straight white. So you kind of got to be careful you don't have too much on your brush. But I'm planning on doing white, and then I'm going to go over it with red after it dries, and that's how you're going to get a much more vibrant red highlight. If you do just straight red, it looks bright while the paint is still wet, and then when it's dry, it's not going to be bright anymore. But if you paint it in white first, it definitely will. So I'm just going across. I've decided to take that up a little bit over there and just stamping my way across to get a little bit of a textured edge. And if you're worried about having too much white paint on your brush, you can wipe it off on the side first. You can always go back and grab more, but it's harder to undo it when you've gone on there with a big glob of paint, although it's fine, you can wipe it off. So now I'm going over to the right side, and I'm going just below where I kind of went across the top edge, and I'm doing very light kind of flicking motions with my brush. The black paint is still wet, and that's okay. It's going to blend in and become a little bit gray. That's totally fine. So my brush is starting down, and I'm flicking the paint upwards very, very lightly. And notice I'm not just going straight across. I'll dip down a little bit, I'll be up a little bit, so you want it to look kind of messy and uneven. And you can lightly go across and do a layer, and then you can go back in and brighten up some areas if you want to. So you're gradually building it up, adding a little bit more white, a little bit more white. I'm adding a little bit more of a highlight to those little bushy areas down at the bottom. And now I'm just going to add some kind of randomly. It doesn't really matter where you put it, but we're just kind of getting it a little more filled in. But again, you want it to be really random. You can do some spots where you're kind of going straight at the canvas, some you're kind of turning at an angle. So now I'm just going to go into that bottom right corner and stamp a little bit more white in there. And so the vertical brush strokes, those are kind of like little grass. And then you can do some that are just spots, just to give the ground some texture. So now we're going to switch to the 1/2 inch flat brush. I'm grabbing some cadmium red medium. I'm grabbing some white, mixing those together to make a tint, which is any color mixed with white. Just wiping my brush so I don't have too much paint. And I'm just going to go in and brighten up the lighting that's being cast from the sun even a little bit more, and that'll also give the bottom area a little time for that white to dry. So notice I'm especially getting the bottom. So there's that hill, and I'm getting the very bottom of what we can see of that hill. And that's going to really make them pop and stand out even more. If you're not trying to get all of your hills, you don't want to go over them with gray again just to get it to blend because it's obviously dry. That's why you want to wipe your brush off on the side. If you just go in with a big glob of yellow paint, it could get kind of messy. So wipe your brush off on the side till you barely have any paint, and then go in and add little highlights on them. With acrylic paint, that's a good way to kind of add light, to cast light onto different objects in your picture plane. So now I'm grabbing a little bit of that orange that we had before. So we've got a little bit of the same white mixed with cadmium yellow medium, but now we've mixed in a little bit of cadmium red light. And just lightly taking that over the top just to make them stand out a little bit more. And you could really, honestly, you could take this even further. You could really go to town and make it super bright and super lit up. I'm trying to stick a little bit more natural into what the photo actually looks like, but it would be easy to take some creative license on this and go crazy. So now I'm adding some cadmium red light to that main peak that we have there, because that's right where we're going to have a lot of red light showing through, and you'll see later when we do the rays of light, that area in particular is going to kind of stay very red. And I love the color red, so in the actual photo there's not as much red showing in the sunset. There's just kind of a hint of it, but I brought it out even a little bit more. So now I have found an area where I wanted to add a little bit more of the gray. So I am going in there and touching it up a little bit. And again, short brush strokes in that area. So now I'm taking the dark color that we made before, that shadow color, and I'm adding it to just one corner of the brush, the small 1/2 inch flat brush. And I'm dragging that across the top to make that stand out even more. And it will blend in as you go if your brush is a little bit damp. Since my brush isn't really fully loaded up in a bunch of gray paint that's the exact same color as I used before, instead you can just have a damp brush and dip one corner in, and then it will kind of blend as you go. And now I'm just kind of making this little mountain over here on the right pop by again adding that shadow to the top. And then mixing up a little bit that peachy mixture to go over it. Wiping my brush off on the side, cleaning it out. And now I'm grabbing my little detail brush. So now you can grab your detail brush and some white paint, and we're going to add in our sun. So you kind of just want to choose where you want it to be. I have a tendency to want to put things into, you know, somewhere near the golden mean, and I usually don't want it in the center. I am going to go to the left of my main peak there, just to bring it more close to the center, but not completely in the center. And we're going to have to do many layers over this, so don't feel like it needs to be perfect. You're going to paint over it for sure, because when you do the rays of light coming from the sun, it's going to kind of mess up what you did anyways. But go ahead and just sketch it in there with white paint. You can make it big or as small as you'd like. And now I'm going in with some cadmium yellow light, and I'm going around it to really give it like a nice glow. And it might seem like silly to have two yellow paints and two red paints, but in order to really achieve the colors in this, you kind of need them. I'm not really a color minimalist, as you will see. I like to use lots of colors. I love many colors of paint. And sometimes I do like to use them straight out of the tube, and I don't have any problem with that. But I like mixing colors too. So now I'm just taking again that cadmium yellow light and going around the sun, and I'm taking some white around it as well, just to brighten it up, because it's obviously on top of yellow, so it's going to be hard to see unless you really use a lot of white first and then paint the yellow over the top of it. And again, because the paints are a little bit translucent, you're going to have to do a few layers. So now I'm using my size 3 pointed brush. And that's a little bit better to get a soft effect. If you're using your size 0 brush, it's too small. It's just for little lines and details. It's not for making something really look like it's glowing. You need a little bit of a bigger brush than that. So now I'm just kind of thinking about where I'm going to put my rays of light. You definitely don't need to do exactly how they look in the photo or exactly how it looks in my picture. You can definitely take creative license here. But the key to doing something like this, like when you've invested this much into making your background really smooth, and or if you like what you've created, it can be like a little intimidating to just go start drawing lines over it. But you have to be really confident in your brush strokes, and that's going to make it look better, especially if you're trying to make straight lines. If you feel like straight lines is just not something that's really going to happen, although they don't need to be perfectly straight, you can use a ruler. So before I go and do the rays, I am adding a little bit more of a yellow highlight to some of my mountains. So now, still using the size 3 pointed round brush, I've got just some white mixed with cadmium yellow light. My brush strokes are starting at the sun, and I'm taking off from there, and I barely have any paint on my brush. You really want to wipe your brush off on the side. You can always go in and make it brighter, but it's going to be really hard to undo it if you do it with too much paint. So you may feel more comfortable doing your brush strokes going from the outside of the canvas in towards the sun. and you may feel more comfortable coming out. So you just have to find what works best for you. Your brush can be perpendicular to the canvas. It doesn't really matter too much what angle you're at. I am going perpendicular because that is the best way for me to make straighter brush strokes. And some of them are going to be implied lines, meaning that we don't see a solid line start to finish. There's breaks in it. And that's going to make it look more like natural lighting. So now I am using my 1/2 inch flat brush. I have a tendency to be able to make straighter lines with that brush. So you can see what works best for you. If I use the edge of it, I can make really precise lines usually. And so I'm trying to just make some skinny, some wide, some long, some short. So I just kind of build them up very slowly, adding on more and more paint, and just making sure that they're all different sizes. If you do just yellow, they're going to appear green because they're over the blue. So you really need a little bit of white mixed in to really help it show up as yellow. So now I'm grabbing just straight white, wiped off some of my paint so there's not too much, using the edge of my 1/2 inch flat. Adding a little bit more paint. Now I'm using the flat side to just blend it out a little bit and also to make it a little bit thicker. You kind of switch between using the flat side and the edge of your brush. So I think it's definitely important to have some that come from the edge of the canvas and then kind of disappear, and vice versa. So some that start off at the sun and they don't go all the way out to the edge. So now I'm going to take my pointed brush and just a little bit of the cadmium yellow light, and I'm adding that again on top of the white and yellow to make it even brighter. And I'm going around the sun. So you can see how the white little sun that you painted in the beginning isn't even really there anymore, and that's totally fine. And now I'm brushing out in horizontal brush strokes surrounding the sun and its glow. If you get any globs of paint, you can just pick it up with your finger. So my brush is damp, and I'm grabbing a little bit more of that white and yellow mixed together. Now I'm going to start on the sun, and I'm doing brush strokes out away from the sun. And as far as like how to know what direction for the lines to go in, you just want to kind of think of it as a clock. So you can find the center of the sun, and from there go straight down. And then anything to the left is going to slowly reach out a little bit more left, a little bit more left. And it's just like a clock, and then the same thing on the right. When you take a photograph and there's a glare, it's not even always 100% exactly like that, so you can take creative license there as well. So these rays of light that are down here in the foreground are going to be more, I'm going to make them more red. It is going to be kind of an orangey red. I'm going to have them fading from more yellow closer to the sun and then getting a little bit more red as they go outwards. So you can keep just brushing over them and building it up very slowly. And as you are doing this, you may find that you're kind of messing up your sun, but don't worry, you're going to do a final layer over it in the end. So now I'm grabbing red, and again, you want to make sure that you wipe your brush off on the side and make sure you don't have too much. You could have the rays of light end before that grassy area in the foreground or after. I'm going to end up having it end before, so I will cover it up just a little bit. So now I'm grabbing more of the pale yellow. And it's the same as at the top, some big, some small. And I'm not really adding on more and more of them, I'm just kind of going over them. So I don't like how thick that one got, so I'm just taking a little Q-tip, dipping it in the water, and then just making it a little bit thinner. But you can see it removed just a little bit of paint there on my mountainside, so I have to go back and repair that. So I'm taking a little bit of blue, a little bit of red, a little bit of white. The color doesn't need to match exactly, but it just needs to be somewhat close. So I'm just filling in that spot where the Q-tip removed the paint. And that's not always going to happen. It's just the paint wasn't 100% dried to the canvas and I pressed down a little bit too hard. A lot of times you can use a Q-tip to remove some, like the top layer, and it's not even going to affect the bottom layer. It just did that time. It also matters how wet it is. So now I'm just going over the sun again with another layer of pure white with my pointed brush. And go over these ones on the top again, making it just a little bit brighter. So you can see some pure white now coming out at the beginning of those rays of light. Now I'm grabbing some cadmium yellow light and going over the white. And now especially right around the sun again, I'm doing another layer of the cadmium yellow light. we're just finishing up on these rays of light, bringing them out just a little bit more. Now we're going to start down here in the grass again. So I'm using the Bristle brush, and I'm grabbing some of that cadmium red light, the orangey red, and I'm very lightly brushing around. I am going on top of the white, but I'm barely touching my brush to the canvas. I don't want any big globs of paint. Now I'm lightly stamping across that top edge, and I'm going to go right over that ray of light that's coming down into the grass. And you don't want it to be the same all the way across. So you'll notice at first I am going to go all the way across, but then I'm going to knock it back in some areas. But look how vibrant that red is with the white showing underneath. If you did just red and you didn't do the white underneath, it wouldn't look even close to that vibrant when it dried. And now I'm going over that center area, doing those little short flicking motions with the same color, the cadmium red light. You can leave some of them a little bit more peachy, and others you can make a lot brighter. And when I was looking back at this video, I kind of liked how it looks when it's so bright right now. But I love bright colors and I love red. But you will see that I'll knock it back quite a lot, so it's not going to stand out this much. So anywhere where I added white before, I'm just stamping over it, adding a little red on the top. In some areas, I'm going to leave some of the white showing through for just a little white highlight. Wiping my brush off. See, now I'm going to grab the black paint, and I'm going up underneath the grassy areas, and I'm flicking my brush up and adding some shadows. And this is going to kind of knock it all back a little bit. And that's kind of how painting is. It's a push and a pull and a push and a pull. You bring it out, you make it very bright and vibrant, and then you knock it back a little bit and bring it out again. And that's how you build it up very slowly. So some of my brush strokes I will take straight through the orange, so there'll be a dark kind of break in between them, and then on others I'll just go up the bottom a little bit. Lightly dabbing. Fanning my brush out. And now I'm just softening the whole thing. So I barely have any black paint on my brush at all. And I'm lightly tapping kind of everywhere, trying to do it random, up, down, side to side. And that's just to soften it up a little bit. It's almost kind of like cheating, because you could take the time to draw every single little blade of grass and every little rock. But that's not really what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to just make it look realistic by just making marks randomly. So you can even do some brush strokes that are flicking your brush from top to bottom, just to create some little breaks in between the grass. And you can see really what we're focusing on in this area is variation. Variation is what makes art better. It's one of the principles of art. And what it is just having a lot of variety. So now we're switching back to the small pointed brush, and I'm grabbing black paint and loading my brush up, and then I'm going to dip one little corner of the brush in some of that peach color to make it a little opaque, and then some of the cadmium red light. And then I'm just doing little brush strokes. And what these are little rocks with a little highlight on top. So I've got the black lined up on the bottom and the light red on the top. And again, some big, some small. And this step is not absolutely necessary, but it adds a nice little texture to it. So now I'm cleaning my brush out. Make sure you get all of the black paint out of there. Get it nice and dry. And I'm coming in with more of the cadmium red light. And now I'm really going to go to town on these rays of light. So I'm adding a lot more red to them now. But still making sure that I wipe my brush off on the side first. Now I'm just touching up the grass that's kind of right in front of that ray of light, just to make it look like it's in front. Grabbing some black. And this is where I'm kind of creating some breaks in the line that goes across the top. So I'm very lightly just tapping. You can even scrub your brush a little bit on the canvas with the black paint just to break it up a little bit. And grabbing a little bit of extra red and making it just a little brighter in some areas. Just painting over the same white that we painted over before. And going over those rays again with the red. And I'm pretty sure they're not this red in the picture. I just really like red, so keep going back and adding more and more. So now I'm grabbing more of the yellow. So I mixed a little cadmium yellow medium with cadmium yellow light. Mix those together a little bit. And so if you add more red to the bottom of the ray and more yellow to the top, it looks nice with them just kind of fading one into the other. It gives it kind of like a prism effect. I'm grabbing more white. I'm going around the sun, so I'm not on the actual sun right now. I'm going around it, and I'm also adding a little bit of extra white paint coming out at the beginning of the rays. So brush strokes are starting at the sun and flicking outwards away from the sun. Just really brightening up that area immediately surrounding it. And we're almost done with the rays in the sun. I'm grabbing some white now and the teeniest, tiniest bit of blue, literally barely any. You want it to be a very, very, very light blue. And we're going to do some simultaneous contrast. So when you add just a little bit of very light blue around the sun, it's going to make the white pop even more. It's going to make the yellow pop even more. And it's also going to help us to really see the defined sun. So very, very light blue, your detail brush, and just go right around the sun. And less is more. Wipe your brush off on the side if you're worried if you have too much. You can use a little extra water to help you make kind of clean finished lines. But now we can really see the sun, whereas before, it's the white against the yellow, so they kind of just blended together, but now we clearly see there's a circle sun there. Now I'm grabbing with my detail brush the cadmium yellow light, and there's a little bit of white in it, and I'm going around just to kind of blend that light blue out a little bit. And now I'm just going over the sun again with another layer of white just to make sure it's really, really bright. You can add just a little extra white with brush strokes coming out from the sun. And I'm just taking that very bright cadmium yellow light and white around the edges just to brighten it up even more. Now I'm grabbing a little bit of the cadmium red, and I'm adding a little bit extra to our little mountains that are right near the sun, just to brighten them up a little bit more. So now it's finally time to start the clouds. So I've got my Filbert brush, and I've got some white and cadmium yellow medium mixed together. And I'm using the edge of my brush. You can use the flat part to fill things in and use the edge to make thinner lines. And I'm just starting to kind of block it in. So figuring out where they're going to go. Yours definitely do not have to be just like mine. That's the great thing about clouds. They're always different, they're always changing, they're always moving. It's more about just trying to get a similar texture. So very soft, very feathery, and very blended so that they feel kind of bulbous. So what you can really get away with is basically doing kind of a wobbly line that goes across horizontally, and it can be as close or as far away from the sun as you want. I did mine kind of halfway in between the yellow of the sky and the blue of the sky. And so I did the bottom edge first, and now I'm coming along with the top edge. So same thing. We're kind of going across, and you can either use the Filbert brush or you can also use your pointed round brush. So now for the top edge, I'm using the pointed round brush. And my marks are going up and down, but in a very random fashion. So now we're going to get in there with more yellow. So we started off with using a lot of white mixed in with our yellow, and now we're adding a little bit more yellow and just kind of going over it again. And clouds, especially at sunset, kind of have this glow. So we're basically painting the glow right now. So we're painting the outer edge, which is very bright. And remember, if you don't have a little bit of white, it will appear green if you just do the yellow on top of the blue sky. So now I'm mixing some red and some blue together. To make a nice kind of neutral purple. So I'm adding a little bit of yellow in there to neutralize it even more. Now we're going to start filling them in. So when I first get in there, it's like, whoa, that's pretty dark. But it is going to be blended into your clouds. So I'm going underneath the white and yellow, but not quite painting over it. Although we will kind of brush where the two colors meet, the light and the dark, just to get it kind of blended. But mainly I'm just going under it right now. And then filling in the middle. With clouds, always short brush strokes when you're actually trying to blend it or fill it in. So now I'm switching to the Filbert brush, which is the perfect brush for clouds. And I've got some cadmium red light and white mixed together, and I'm now going along the bottom. I'm doing short brush strokes using the flat side of my brush, and I'm now going underneath the dark purple color because there's kind of a red highlight under there. And I'm blending them in by brushing over it. I just went and got a little extra water on my brush to make it a little bit more damp. Very short brush strokes. And if you brush very lightly with just a teeny bit of water on your brush, just a damp brush, and you brush in between where your red color and your purple color meet, they'll blend together. So I'm adding just a little bit of extra purple in there. I'm adding a little black to make it a little darker, but also to give it kind of a gray tone to it. Now I've got blue, black, and still a little bit of red from before. And I'm going along the top. So the rounded part of my brush is right now facing upwards. And I'm just dabbing that along some of those top edges. And I do think it's best if the clouds don't just stop abruptly before each edge of the canvas, no matter what the photo looks like, because you want to feel like the clouds extend beyond the picture plane. So you can see as I make it a little bit darker up there, they're really starting to pop. A little bit more of the orange and coming along the bottom edge again, just building it up. Still the very short brush strokes. Wipe it on the side, make sure there's not too much. You definitely want your brush to be a little bit damp for the clouds because they're very, very blended, and acrylic paint needs water to blend it. So don't worry if you're covering up what you feel like is a little too much of your glow. We're going to go over that part again. So it's now time to go back in with our lighter colors. So I've got the Filbert brush and the white and yellow mixed together. And I'm going along that top edge. So I've got a damp brush and I'm dipping just one side of my brush in the yellow and white. And if your brush is damp, it will blend as you go. That's a really easy way to make it look very blended. But you really want to follow the shape of the clouds and bend up and down when it bends up and down. I'm cleaning my brush out. Grabbing the yellow and white again. I'm going to come along the bottom edge, making sure my brush is damp. You want to flow along the edge, but you also want to, especially along the bottom, kind of flick your brush upwards in kind of a U shape. And that will give it that kind of fluffy cloud feel. If you pick up red, you're going to have to wipe your brush or clean it out because we don't want red down below. There you can really see those lines. So now I'm adding just teeny little marks with the pale yellow that are outside of the clouds. And this is just making them a little bit more wispy. Just kind of wiggly little marks. Now I'm coming down below the cloud quite a bit. Now I'm adding a little bit of pale yellow, kind of like a little spot inside the cloud. Sometimes clouds have like a little hole in them. There's a little break where the light is coming through. And going along the bottom and brightening it up again. So on the right, my brush strokes that were underneath the cloud, they kind of bended upwards towards the right. Now the ones in the middle, I started to bend more towards the left. Now I'm grabbing my darker purple color. And I'm adding a second layer down below this one. You could do it as you go, but I just did it this way so maybe it'd be a little less confusing, so you could kind of just focus on one string of clouds across, and then once you finish it, just add one that's peeking out from behind. So now I'm adding the red color. Now I've got a little bit of yellow on my brush and I'm very lightly using short brush strokes to brush over it. just feathering out the red just a little bit with some white. And going up along the bottom edge again with those lines from before. Same thing in the middle there. Our pointed brush in white and yellow again. We're just going over it again to make it stand out even more. So going along the top, going over your little wispy marks or adding more of them. As far as what yellow you use, it's totally up to you. If you like more of that neon yellow look, you can use more of the cadmium yellow light. And if you like the deeper yellow, you can use more of that. So I am going over on top of the white in some areas, adding a little bit more yellow. Now I'm really getting in there with some white. I just want it to pop a lot. I'm just adding a little bit more yellow to the bottoms of the clouds there. And those same brush strokes going in kind of U shape up towards the right. So the rest of this is kind of just detailing the clouds to get them to where you want them. I've got my pointed brush and I'm grabbing more of that neutral purple color. And short brush strokes, adding a little bit to the top right corner. I wanted to lighten it up, but I used a little bit too much white, so I kind of had to find a happy in between there. just darkening up the top just a little bit more. So I'm just going through with one more layer of red, one more little layer of white underneath. And that's pretty much it. So now it's just kind of time to touch things up. Whenever I get to this point in a painting, what I'll usually do is just set it up where I can look at it, take a break, have a cup of tea, have a snack, and just stare at it from a distance. And you'll see things that you didn't see before, and you might find a couple little things to fix, but you definitely need a break to sit back and look at it from far away in order to really kind of take it all in, because when you've been staring at it for over an hour, you really kind of lose sight of what it looks like. The other thing you can do is take a picture. For some reason, when you take a picture, it really helps you see it in a different perspective. So I do suggest taking a break from it, but don't quite put your paints away yet. And see if there's any little last touches you want to make. Paint your edges, sign your painting if that's something that you do. And I want to thank you all so much for watching, and thank you for painting along with me. Just let me know if you have any questions. We'll see you next time.